You're completely useless as a daughter-in-law. Even though I was married and living happily with my husband, only the presence of my mother-in-law was really depressing. Her snoring escalated more and more, and my patience reached the limit. I'm Miranda. I'm 31 years old and married my husband Rufus 1 year ago, and I work part-time. When we got married, we moved near my husband's parents' house and started a new life. We live together while cooperating so that we can spend our time comfortably with each other. However, after a year of marriage, I was starting to struggle with my relationship with my mother-in-law. Perhaps because we live near my parents-in-law's house, my mother-in-law has come to our house frequently. I want to get along with my son's wife. At first, she came to visit our house while saying that. We had tea at our house, chatted with me and my husband, and left. My mother-in-law treats me with the same smile as she does to her husband. I wanted to get along with my mother-in-law. I was relieved to see her like that, and that I would be able to get along well. That's why I was willing to accept my mother-in-law who occasionally came to my house. However, at first, it was about twice a month, but it increased to 3 or 4 times. Before I noticed it, my mother-in-law began to visit my house once a week. Moreover, it is only when her husband is not around, as she intended. And my mother-in-law, who seemed to be kind, gradually began to show me her true nature. The inside of the refrigerator is not organized, but are you managing it properly? I wonder if poor management is a sign of personality. If you do this, your son will divorce you soon, right? One day, my mother-in-law opened my refrigerator without permission and said so. I was surprised by her actions, but more than anything, by her mother-in-law's words. This is because I never imagined that my kind mother-in-law would say such a thing. Oh, I'm sorry. I was taken aback and reflexively apologized. Then my mother-in-law gave me a stern look for a moment. Please be careful. The smiling face until now has a cold expression as if it were a lie. After that, there was no chatting as usual, and my mother-in-law went home in a bad mood. Did I do something to make her angry? However, I have no idea. Maybe she just happened to be in a bad mood today. I convinced myself that I didn't care about it anymore. However, after this day, my mother-in-law's attitude toward me suddenly changed. Every time she comes to our house, she complains you can't clean it, the tea is bad. And also she complains about the way I hang the laundry and everything else she sees. In the words of my mother-in-law, who has decades of experience as a full-time housewife. At first, I honestly heard that it was because I wasn't doing it properly. However, as I was told so many times every time, it no longer felt like she was just looking for something wrong. I'm sure she's thinking about me, but I've been getting a lot of attention lately. Because she keeps saying things about really small things. As expected, I was in trouble every week when my mother-in-law told me a small word, and I consulted my husband lightly. Really? I'm sorry to make you feel uncomfortable. I'll tell her a few words. My husband was surprised that his mother was doing such a thing. Like me, I guess he can't imagine it from my usual mother-in-law. However, when my husband heard my story, he immediately called my mother-in-law and told her about it. I am very grateful to my husband who believed my story and immediately took action. I was reassured that my husband was on my side. I stroke my chest thinking that my mother-in-law will not say a lot to me with this. However, the reality was not so easy. The next day, my mother-in-law came to our house as usual. The front door is so dirty, why don't you clean it? Are you aware of yourself as my son's wife? Despite being warned by my husband, my mother-in-law screams as soon as she opens the front door. She seemed quite upset that I had consulted with my husband and that he had warned her. I am horrified by the appearance of my mother-in-law, who is more aggressive than usual. My mother-in-law, who came up to the house, began to look around the house. And she continues to search for something in the house and complain. I should have let my husband do a little better. I regret that I consulted my husband yesterday with a light heart. In the end, my husband's attention had no effect and only added fuel to the fire. It's an insidious daughter-in-law to make my son warn me. I really didn't want a woman like you to be my son's wife. My mother-in-law took that as an opportunity to complain about me one after another. What used to be a complaint about my housework has changed to something that clearly attacks me. My mother-in-law didn't like me and had been saying a lot of things until now. Insensitive, I finally understood it at this time. Then I lived to avoid my mother-in-law. On my days off, I schedule various things and go out with my husband. Still, there were days when I couldn't avoid it, and I couldn't help but deal with my mother-in-law that day. I want you to break up with my son as soon as possible. It could have been anyone other than you. My mother-in-law no longer hides her malicious intentions, and she wants me to disappear. Every time I was told that, my heart was broken, but luckily my husband takes good care of me. No matter what my mother-in-law said, our relationship was going well. I managed to withstand her attack. Since then, for some reason, I have been spending less time at home and avoiding contact with her. This was the only thing I could do when I knew that my husband's attention was ineffective. If you don't meet in person, there won't be much damage. That's how I decided to distance myself from my mother-in-law. One day, my husband informed me that there was a dinner party at my parents-in-law's house. It seems that all the relatives get together for a meal. To be honest, I was reluctant to go to my parents-in-law's house, but I couldn't afford not to participate when my relatives gathered. I replied to my husband that I understood. I didn't want to see my mother-in-law, but she didn't show her true nature in front of my husband. She won't snore at me in such a day. I didn't take it so seriously and went to my parents-in-law's house with my husband on the day of the dinner party. Relatives were already gathered there, and the atmosphere was lively. My mother-in-law is also smiling in the center of everyone's circle. "Rufus, come over here with Miranda." Noticing that we had come, my mother-in-law called us to sit next to her. Actually, the reason why we all came here today is because we have an important story to tell. My mother-in-law made me sit down and confirmed it. Suddenly, she stood up and started talking loudly so that everyone in the room could hear her. I think infidelity is the worst thing you can do. I don't think it's good to have someone in your family who is having an affair. My mother-in-law suddenly mentioned the topic of infidelity. Everyone knows that infidelity is bad. Did they gather us together to make such a speech? I am confused because I don't understand my mother-in-law's intentions. The relatives around me all looked at me wondering what the hell was going on. My mother-in-law doesn't care about such an atmosphere and continues to talk. Someone recently has been acting like they're running away from me. A ridiculous fact has been discovered, and I want everyone to see it. When she said that, she handed out a photo to everyone. There was a picture of me and a man walking together. "Miranda, you're having an affair, aren't you? There's evidence, there's no escaping. My son's wife is having an affair." The photograph was confronted in front of me as evidence of infidelity. Of course, there is no doubt that I am the one in this photo. All my relatives will think I'm having an affair. I understood why my mother-in-law gathered her relatives here today. I don't want a bride who does a bad thing like this. Miranda, you should get out of here. My mother-in-law said so in front of her relatives. Rufus, you'd better divorce this traitorous wife. My relatives all turned their cold glances at me at once, and some of them nodded at my mother-in-law's words. My husband and I were speechless at the sudden turn of events. But I'm not having an affair. No, he is. Just as I opened my mouth to clear up a misunderstanding, my husband, who was sitting next to me, suddenly stood up. The next moment, bang! A loud sound echoes in the place. To my surprise, my husband slapped his mother as much as he could. I and my other relatives were astonished by the sight. In the silence of the place, my husband's voice echoed even more. Don't treat it as an affair without knowing anything. My husband yelled at his mother and forced her to sit down when she was standing up. And my husband began to tell everyone present about the truth of the photo. What you see here is my wife and her brother, and it's not a picture of an affair. He was right. My younger brother, who lives alone in the town 1 station next to our house, broke his leg a while ago. My younger brother was alone because he had no one to rely on, so he asked me to take care of him for a while. It was difficult to go to the hospital, so I had a car, so I took care of the pickup and drop off at the hospital and simple housework. The photo must have been taken when we went to the hospital. I was shoulder to shoulder because I was lending my shoulder to my younger brother who couldn't walk well. My husband knew about it, so he knew right away that it wasn't my affair. My husband explained everything to his relatives and mother. He proved my innocence, that it was not an affair. I don't know what you're thinking, but what the hell are you going to do? Secretly take such a photo and imitate it like this? I think it's a much bigger problem. After the misunderstanding of all the relatives was cleared up, my husband began to question his mother. Indeed, I wonder why my mother-in-law has such a picture. Then my mother-in-law began to speak in a panicked manner. It's different. Miranda's recent behavior was a little suspicious. I was just curious and looked it up. She started avoiding me, and I wondered what she was hiding and messing with. I guess it was because I was avoiding my mother-in-law. My dissatisfied mother-in-law surprisingly followed me and took pictures like this. Maybe she was looking for an excuse to kick me out, but honestly, it's unforgivable. It's wrong to do something that makes you suspicious. You're the one who created this situation. My mother-in-law, who was blamed by my husband and relatives for not doing it, insisted that it was all my fault. Maybe she doesn't like me, but I can't understand why she did it like this. I was stunned by my mother-in-law's behavior. Despite me, my mother-in-law continues to make excuses. Maybe it's because I'm a bad daughter-in-law, or because I'm opening the house and playing around. She was desperate to make me the bad guy. Mother. Come on, okay? That's how you've been snoring, Miranda. I'm insulated from you. At my husband's words, my mother-in-law, who had been making excuses until then, stopped moving. She looks at my husband with a surprised expression. Until now, Miranda has been patient. You didn't even know that, and you did such a thing. My husband glared at his mother with cold eyes. The reason I was frequently out of my house was to avoid my mother-in-law. The more careful my husband is, the stronger my mother-in-law's hit on me. My husband explained I had no choice but to do so. My relatives ask me, really, and I nod silently. The cold eyes of my relatives were not on me, but on my mother-in-law. My mother-in-law called relatives and tried to trap me. In the end, she ended up dragging her into the pits by herself. All of them had an attitude of contempt for my mother-in-law. Some people yell at my mother-in-law for calling them such a silly thing. Some people preach to my mother-in-law about her daughter-in-law. After that, the relatives went home, and my parents-in-law and my husband and I had a discussion. In the end, at the strong request of my husband, we and my mother-in-law insulated. We also moved to another area, and we decided not to have anything to do with my mother-in-law in the future. I'm going to your funeral, so don't get involved with us again. My husband coldly tells his mother so, and he pulls my hand and leaves his parents' house. I could hear my mother-in-law's sobbing voice behind me. After that, my mother-in-law seems to have been abandoned by her husband, and it seems that he has not spoken to her at all on this day. My husband had received many calls from his mother. It seems that she was persistently asking his father to persuade to forgive her. My mother-in-law doesn't seem to understand the meaning of isolation and changes his phone number. Finally, my mother-in-law could not even call my husband. According to my father-in-law, she has a grudge against me, saying that it is all my fault. My father-in-law leaked to my husband that he would divorce if my mother-in-law doesn't reflect on it. It was my mother-in-law who tried to make us divorce and tried to kick me out. On the other hand, the day when she will be divorced and kicked out may not be far off. We immediately moved out of the vicinity of my parents-in-law's house. Now we live in a place that has nothing to do with my parents-in-law. At the very least, my father-in-law took out of my mother-in-law's savings and gave it to us. I don't have to be afraid of my mother-in-law coming, and living in our new home is comfortable. I feel like I'm a newlywed again, and I'm enjoying my life as a married couple with my husband I can rely on.